Hey guys, Dave with First Place Auto Parts. You know, my 56 Chevrolet has been under wraps. Actually, it's been under double wraps for over 5 months now after I winterized it and put it away for the winter time. Look, this car isn't a lot of fun to drive when it's cold out. Even in Georgia, this thing doesn't have a heater. So I usually put it away pretty good for the winter time so I can get it back out in the spring. And in today's video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at what it takes to de-winterize your car properly. If you have an American muscle car or a classic truck and you put it away for the wintertime, or maybe you live in the northern climates where there's always snow and salt, worse yet, and you put your car away. What we're gonna do in today's video is we're gonna show you what I do to get my car back on the road and some tips and tricks along the way. Look, it's gonna include everything that can possibly leak, including air, fuel, and water, and a couple of other things that you might find interesting for the next time you winterize your car. So guys, stay tuned to today's video, and today we're gonna show you how to de-winterize your classic car or truck, get it on the road so it's good and safe, and you can enjoy the rest of your spring and summer. Stay tuned. Hey guys, if you like today's video, please consider subscribing to the First Place Auto Parts YouTube channel. We're going to continually be adding new videos every week where we show you how to put new parts on. We take a look at the latest parts that are available, and we go to some pretty cool car guy stuff I'm pretty sure you're going to want to see. Okay, I've gotten the car cover off, the hood open, and I'm going to tell you guys that it's really fun working on a car that doesn't have any inner fender wells and has a hood that tilts forward. It makes it so much easier. But earlier I mentioned that I had made a list. When I shut this thing down and put it away for the winter time, I changed the oil and drained the, as I said earlier, the gas tank and the fuel lines and the carburetors. But perhaps one of the most important things I did was I made a list of everything that I would need to do to de-winterize my car come springtime. I do this every year. I've owned this car for 13 years, and guys, this has never failed me. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go to the top of the list, which says to adjust the valves. One of the things that I do with my vehicles when they're gonna sit more than a couple of months is I go ahead and back off the rocker arm nuts to take the pressure off of the valve springs and off of the lifters. While I had the valve covers off, I'll go ahead and drizzle some oil over the rocker arms and down the push rods. And on the second line item here, I have on there to add a half a quart of oil. This motor holds 10 quarts of oil because it has a big, deep oil pan. But what I did was I added 9.5 quarts and a new filter when I bid it. But I left a half a quart out so that I can go ahead and essentially lubricate those rocker arms. There are roller rockers on this motor, which means there's needle bearings, but also the lifters themselves are roller rockers too, or have roller bearings on them. So I want oil to be down there when I start it up the first time. Next thing I have on here is to install a new valve cover gasket, which because I have the valve covers off, I do that every year just to be safe. I hate leaks. And then finally tighten the fan belt. One additional thing that I'm going to do with my vehicle is I'm going to go ahead and install new spark plugs. This tunnel ram with these two carburetors can be kind of tough on spark plugs. It's jetted really well, but what it doesn't like is being turned on and turned off without warming up and being driven a little bit. Every year it's cheap insurance. I go ahead and replace my spark plugs. I recommend you do that as well. It tells you a lot about how your engine is running, but also I'll tell you these old ignition systems, even if you have an MSD and a hot coil, which I have on this, new spark plugs absolutely will cure a lot of those ills that you could possibly be chasing after you go to get your car started again. If you drained your carburetors. Look guys, if your car, when you start it up in the springtime, runs rough, it could be either fuel related or it could be spark related, which is why I do all the preparation that I do in the fall. So when I go to start this thing up in the spring, it's pretty straightforward. So what I'm gonna do, because this thing has an electric fuel pump, I'm gonna go ahead and pressurize the fuel system. I'm gonna turn the power onto the car, pressurize the fuel system. I'm going to check for leaks on all the various areas and the hookups on my carburetors. I'm also going to check my cooling system to make sure that it has coolant, but also check for leaks. One of the things that I noticed when I opened the hood is that I have an area of rust down here on this fitting that I didn't have in the springtime. And what happened is this hose has been on this motor for 5 or 6 years, but rubber hoses compress over time, which means the hose clamp itself doesn't have the same amount of pressure that it did when it was on there and it was new. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that all my hose clamps are tight as well. Again, when we take a car out for the first time, the one thing we don't have to do is come back on the back of a tow truck or a flatbed. So really we just kind of want to nut and bolt on the engine. We want to check for leaks, both coolant and fuel, and we're going to go ahead in this case adjust the valve train, but also put new spark plugs in it. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check the air pressure in my tires. As I had said earlier, I overinflate them a little bit because they're going to be stored for the winter. They're off the ground, but it helps keep their shape. The rear tires are retreads. They're old cheater slicks, which means that they have a certain shape when they were vulcanized. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and get in the car now. I'm gonna pressurize the fuel system. I put 5 gallons of premium fuel in it, a little bit of stabilizer because I'm not sure what kind of frequency I'm gonna be driving this thing this spring, but I wanna make sure the fuel stays fresh, and we'll check for fuel leaks. Let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, I'm checking around the carburetor now, got everything pressurized, and I can see that I have a leak right here. Now, one of the things that I like to do is take a clean paper towel, and I'll wipe it up underneath anything that has to do with fuel. And what you'll see is there's nothing on this, but when I put it up underneath this hose clamp, you'll actually see it discolor, and it tells me that there's fuel there. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see things like maybe antifreeze, brake fluid, or gasoline because it's clear. With a paper towel, what you can do is oftentimes what you can't feel, if you wipe it around these areas, and if you have any kind of residue that's come off of it, you know you have a leak. So what I can tell right now is that I have a leak right here that I'm gonna have to fix. Again, the rubber hose with a hose clamp, probably just the hose clamp has lost a little bit of its tension because the hose has gotten compressed a little bit, and I just need to tighten it. But either way, this has got to get fixed before I can do anything else. And another thing to check with your fuel system, if you have a mechanical fuel pump, you'll have to do this while the engine is running. If you have an electric fuel pump, you can go ahead and just leave the engine off, turn the fuel pump on, and you can get pressurized at your fuel system. But take your air cleaner off and take a look at the vents, the float bowl vents on your carburetor to make sure there's not fuel coming out of those. On the Edelbrock carburetor, the vents are on the side here. On the Holly, there'll be brass tubes that stick up in front of the float bowls on either side. But either way, if your floats are sticking, that will allow fuel to bypass the needle and seat and come out of those vents, and you'll have fuel everywhere. So make sure you check that too before you go off on your first drive. Could be really catastrophic if you had raw fuel pumping out of these things. Look, it's going to run really bad when it's doing it. You should know. But if you don't, if it's a slow leak or your floats are just kind of stuck, you could be having fuel come out of these vents. So make sure that your floats aren't stuck before you go on your first drive. All told, guys, I have a couple of hours in getting my car back on the road again. I had to adjust the valves and do some things that you may or may not have to do. But the reality is, what you do in the fall when you put your car away for the wintertime will dictate how much work and if you're successful or not at getting your car back on the road in the spring. A lot will also have to do with how it runs in the spring. Look, did you drain the fuel? Did you treat the fuel if you left it in your tank? All these things will have a huge impact on the drivability of your car come springtime, but make sure you check everything. It's a safety or a running issue with your car. Check your fuel, make sure you don't have any leaks. Make sure you have fresh oil and that it's at the right capacity. Check your coolant level, check your belts and hoses. Make sure nothing's gonna leave you stranded on the road when you go out for that first drive. When cars sit for extended periods of time, it's really hard on them. There's seals that shrink up, there's gaskets that get shriveled, and you get leaks that you never knew that you had. That's why typically a lot of people don't put their car away for the winter time, but the reality is here, I wasn't gonna drive it at all. So if your car is gonna sit for more than 3 months, make sure that you put it away correctly, but also make sure that you bring it out of hibernation correctly as well. It'll pay dividends down the road, especially when you're going to your favorite cruise night, driving your favorite girl to dinner, or just going out for a blast down the road to steer the gears a little bit. Guys, at First Place Auto Parts, we have got a lot of parts for restoration and performance for the American muscle car and also classic trucks. If you ever need anything for your vehicle to make it look better, go faster, or just to restore it back to its former glory, go to our always open, super easy to use website at fpautoparts.com. Until next time, keep the hammer down and keep it between the guardrails.